The House Above the Sea. Chapter 1. The House Above the Sea. The house stood alone above the sea, half forgotten by the world and half claimed by the wind. The cliffs below it were sharp and black, like broken glass. When the tide rose, it sounded as if the ocean was trying to speak. When it fell, only silence answered. She arrived at the end of summer, carrying a single suitcase and a look that didn't belong to any season. The driver asked if she was sure. No phone lines, no shops, no company but gulls and weather. She said she wanted the quiet. The driver shrugged. "Quiet's never what people think it is," he said. Then he left her there. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. The shutters rattled as if surprised to find someone breathing again in those rooms. She set her bag on the floor, opened the windows, and let the sea in. The wind came with salt and the faint cry of waves breaking on stone. She stood there for a long while, not moving. The house was meant for two. You could tell by the twin chairs on the terrace, the double bed, the two chipped mugs in the cupboard. Whoever had built it had believed in something. Love, maybe, or escape. She didn't believe in either, but she liked that someone once had. Later, near sunset, she saw a man walking along the narrow path that wound down to the shore. He moved with the slow confidence of someone who belonged to the place. He carried a coil of rope over his shoulder, and his shirt was faded to the color of rain. He stopped when he reached the gate. "Didn't think anyone was living up here anymore," he said. "I am for now," she replied. He nodded. "You'll get the wind before the night does." "I already have." He smiled a little, but his eyes stayed serious. "If the chimney starts to moan, it means the storm's close. Happens fast this time of year." "Does it ever not happen fast?" "No," he said. "That's the point." He turned and walked down toward the rocks again, the ropes swinging like a pendulum. She watched him until the sea took him. The nights came quickly on that coast. By the time she lit the lamp, the sky had gone dark as ink poured into water. She read for a while, but couldn't focus on the words. The wind pressed against the walls, as if testing them. Every sound carried. The sea was never still, it breathed in its sleep. She dreamed of someone knocking. When she woke, there was no one, only the long hiss of the tide. The next morning she found him again, near the waterline, working on a small boat overturned on the sand. He was scraping the old paint off the hull. His movements were steady, unhurried. The gulls kept their distance from him, as if they respected something they couldn't name. "You live nearby?" she asked. He looked up. "Far enough to forget it, close enough to come back." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like a story." It was. Then it stopped being one. "What happened?" He set down the scraper and wiped his hands on a rag. "The ending did." She wanted to ask more, but his tone closed the subject like a door. They stood together in silence, the kind that felt full rather than empty. The water drew back and returned again, patient and unashamed of repetition. "Do you fish?" he asked suddenly. "No. I paint." "Paint what?" "Places where people almost loved each other." He gave a small laugh. "That's a narrow kind of geography. It's the only kind that lasts." He nodded as if he understood. Then he lifted the boat's edge and set it upright with one clean motion. In the following days, he came often, to fix something, to borrow a tool, to talk about the weather as if it were a mutual friend. She didn't ask for his name. It came naturally one morning when the tide brought in driftwood and dead fish. He said, "Call me Daniel." "Ellen," she said. They shook hands, and it felt unnecessary, but they did it anyway. They spoke of ordinary things. How the sea changed color each day, how the cliffs echoed differently after rain. She learned he had been a fisherman once, then something else. He didn't say what, and she didn't press. Some silences deserved respect. One afternoon, he helped her carry a painting outside to dry. It was of the horizon, nothing else. "You missed the land," he said. "I didn't want it." "You think the sea is enough?" "It's never enough. That's why it works." He looked at her, then at the canvas, then back at her again. "You talk like someone who lost something important." "I did." He waited. She shook her head. "But I'm not here to find it." By October, the nights turned colder. They drank wine on the terrace to keep warm. The stars were few but sharp, like pins in dark cloth. He told her about the storm of 5 years before, how it had taken a friend and a boat in the same night. "People said I should have gone out with him," Daniel said. "Why didn't you?" "I was in love." "With her?" He nodded. "Did it help?" "No." She left anyway. She studied him in the dim light. People leave when the sea calls louder. He laughed softly. So which one are you? The one who leaves or the one who listens? Neither, she said. I just came to hear it once properly. The wind rose, carrying their words away before they could mean too much. The first real storm came 2 weeks later. It arrived without warning, except for the smell, sharp and metallic, like blood in the air. The waves climbed the cliffs and broke against the house, shaking the windows. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Around midnight, there was a knock. When she opened the door, Daniel stood soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead. The chimney's going, he said. You'll lose the roof if it pulls free. She let him in without a word. They climbed to the attic, fighting the wind that came in through the seams. He tied the rope around the beam, secured it to a hook by the stairs. His hands moved fast and sure. When it was done, they sat on the floor, breathing hard, the air thick with rain and salt. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Didn't want the house to go. It's got stories in it. So do I. Then maybe it'll keep standing. They stayed there until the noise faded. When morning came, the sea was calm again, as if it had forgotten everything. After that night, something changed. They spoke less, but felt more. The air between them carried a quiet charge. He still worked on his boat each morning. She painted in the afternoons. Sometimes they crossed paths and didn't speak at all, but their silences said enough. One evening, he brought fish and bread. They ate on the terrace without plates. You ever think about leaving? He asked. All the time. So why don't you? I want to know what happens if I stay. He smiled. Most people don't stay long enough to find out. What happens? He looked toward the horizon. You stop thinking the sea's beautiful. You start thinking it's honest. Winter came slow, like an old man climbing stairs. The mornings were gray, the water darker. She painted less, slept more. Daniel visited less often, or maybe she noticed less when he did. Then one morning, he didn't come at all. Days passed. The path to the shore went unused, and the air grew heavy with the kind of waiting that knows it's pointless. She walked down to the beach to look for him. His boat was gone, the mooring rope frayed at the end. The tide had risen high enough to erase all footprints. She stood there until her shoes filled with water. When she went back to the house, she saw something on the terrace, a coil of rope, neatly set beside the door. It was his, the one he always carried. She sat with it in her lap. It smelled of salt and wood and loss. That night, she lit a fire and painted again. This time, she painted not the horizon, but a small figure standing at the edge of it, looking back. Weeks passed before she saw him again. He came walking from the south, leaner, darker, eyes burned by wind. You left, she said simply. I tried to. Did it work? No. He stood in the doorway, dripping from the rain. You kept the house warm. It didn't want to be empty again. He came inside. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was steady, like a heartbeat. He looked at her painting. You made me taller. You earned it. He smiled. You make it sound like survival. Isn't that what love is? They stayed through the rest of winter. He mended the roof. She cooked more than she ever had. They argued about small things, how to light a fire properly, which wine was better, how long a silence could last before it turned into something else. Sometimes she caught him watching her, as if he were trying to memorize the moment. What are you looking for? She asked once. The part that won't fade, he said. It all fades. Then I'll keep repainting it. She laughed softly. That's not how painting works. It's how memory does. By spring, the sea grew calmer. Tourists began to appear in the town below, taking pictures of cliffs they didn't understand. Daniel went down once to sell fish and came back uneasy. They talk too loud, he said. They're just visiting. So were we, he said. She looked at him, knowing what he meant. Then where do we go? Maybe nowhere. Maybe this is it. Forever. He hesitated. Just until it breaks. The day it broke was clear and cruelly beautiful. The sea was still, the air warm enough to trick them into believing it would last. He went out early with the tide, said he'd be back before noon. By sunset, the horizon was empty. She waited through the night, through the next day, through the next week. The sea stayed calm, as if mocking her. When they finally found the boat, days later, overturned near the rocks, there was no body. Only his jacket, torn by the wind. She kept it, hung it on the chair beside hers on the terrace. Years later, people in the village still said the house above the sea was haunted. They said sometimes, at dusk, you could see a woman standing there, her hair white, her eyes fixed on the horizon. They didn't know she was still listening. Not for him, but for the sound of the rope tightening against the wind, the proof that something once held. And when the sea finally rose high enough to reach the terrace, she didn't move. Because love, like the tide, doesn't end. It just takes back what was always its own. Chapter 2. The Sea That Gave Back. He woke on the sand with the taste of salt and iron in his mouth. The sea had gone quiet, the way it does after taking something it wanted. The sky was a pale gray, like a sheet washed too many times. He lay there for a while, not moving, because moving would make it real. He remembered the storm breaking quick, the sail tearing loose, the line cutting his hand, the sudden weight of the water pulling everything down. He had called her name once, but the wind took it before he heard it himself. Then came the blackness, and after that, the silence. When he opened his eyes again, the world was smaller. The cliffs were unfamiliar. His boat was gone, half swallowed by sand. He was alive, though he couldn't decide if that was mercy or cruelty. He stood slowly. Every joint ached. The air smelled clean, cruelly clean. He turned toward the horizon, but the house above the sea was nowhere to be seen. He started walking anyway. It took him 2 days to reach the village. His clothes had dried stiff with salt. The fishermen looked at him as though he were a ghost. One of them crossed himself. Another brought him bread and water without asking his name. They said the storm had taken 3 boats. Only one body had been found. When he told them his name, they went quiet. "She buried you," one man said. Daniel said nothing. He walked out of the tavern and sat by the docks. The water lapped against the stones, mild and indifferent. Somewhere far above him, he knew the house still stood. He didn't go to it. Not yet. For weeks he stayed in a room above the harbor. He worked mending nets for men who wouldn't meet his eyes. At night he lay awake listening to the same sea that had kept him alive and taken everything else. He tried to paint, but the brush felt foreign. He tried to drink, but the wine turned to vinegar in his mouth. Once, he thought he saw her on the road above the cliffs, a figure in a dark coat, standing still against the wind. He went toward her, but by the time he reached the ridge, there was nothing there but gulls. He told himself she had moved on. He told himself that was mercy, but the mind doesn't believe what the mouth repeats. By late spring, he couldn't stand the village anymore. The living had a way of avoiding those the sea returned. He packed his things, what little there was, and began walking north along the shore. Each night, he camped by the water, lighting small fires and listening for what didn't speak. He began to dream again. Always the same dream. The house on the cliff, her voice calling from inside. The wind carrying the scent of salt and paint. Sometimes he reached the door before waking. Sometimes he never did. On the 12th morning, he reached the cove below the house. The tide was low, the rocks slick with morning rain. The path upward was still there, narrow, cruel, and steep. He climbed. When he reached the top, he saw the shutters first. They were open, as they had been the day he left. The terrace was empty except for 2 chairs and a jacket hanging on one of them. His jacket, faded now to the color of ash. He didn't move for a long time. The house seemed to watch him, silent and patient. Finally, he stepped forward. "Ellen," he said. His voice cracked on the name. No answer. He opened the door. Inside, the air smelled of oil paint and seaweed. Dust floated in the sunlight. On the table lay a small wooden box, a brush beside it, and one unfinished canvas. He turned it over. It was a painting of the horizon again, but this time 2 figures stood at the edge of it, facing each other. He sat down, his hand shaking. The wind came through the open window, soft as breath. He stayed there for 3 days. No one came. On the 2nd night, he lit a fire in the hearth, just to hear the sound of something living. He spoke aloud, not to her, not really, but to the air. "I thought I'd gone," he said. "I thought you'd be glad." The fire didn't answer, but it didn't go out either. On the 3rd morning, he found a letter tucked behind one of the window frames, folded tight to keep it safe from weather. The ink had bled, but the words were still legible. "If you ever come back, I hope you don't. If you do, there's wine in the cellar and your rope by the door. I didn't wait, but I didn't leave either. The sea doesn't take what it loves, it lends it. I'll be where it returns me." No name, no signature, but her hand was unmistakable. He read it twice, then folded it again, slower this time, and placed it back where he found it. That night, he walked down to the shore. The tide was high,